Base up. That's good.
Well, you probably know me. I'm the OS2 idiot. I've already been doing this for close to 25 years. I don't know when exactly. I stepped forward, I think, somewhere in probably 1998, 1999 to become president of Voice. I'll soon have my 25-year anniversary. I helped to get Bitwise work started. I worked for 12 years on Ecom Station. I did several Warpstocks. Things have been going a bit slow, grappling with COVID and long COVID issues for having it had twice. I bought an apartment, so life moves on. So things are quieting down a bit. The house is set up. I'm doing a lot better, so let's move on. Andy, after this presentation, if you have time and you're interested, I've got the secure boot stuff on the stick, so that we can try it out. If there's anybody else that wants to have these tools, I hope after the manual is now in a far more progressed state, describing how it works. I'll show that briefly. It's based on Linux tools, but these versions have been adapted to talk to the UEFI loader because it needs to get the certs into the UEFI firmware. This is for systems that do not have a setup in the BIOS. Andy has one of those laptops. You can switch the laptop to a maintenance mode, and then it allows for you to insert the UEFI cert. But you can only do that from the operating system. There's nothing in the UEFI menu. These tools only work on ArcOS 5.10 and higher. Doing it on a system that boots in BIOS mode is of no use because there is no interface to talk to. Manual's almost finished. The sources will be published on GitHub, and it was created by my boyfriend Jeroen. Yeah, living together for 16 years with an OS2 zealot Robzolf, so he kind of got it. He's originally started out as a Linux guy, did maintenance at a Dutch ISP where they use Linux, and he has been fervently involved in writing Qt apps on Windows, Linux, and writing Linux kernel modules. He even won a prize from the Dutch electronics manufacturer Philips at the time for a USB webcam driver, so he's pretty versed in writing code, and last 2 or 3 years he's been looking a bit at OS2. I'll get back to that later, because for me that was also an interesting experience to see from close by how somebody with that much experience can get pretty frustrated by a platform if you're not familiar with its quirks, kinks, etc. So, X-Workplace, Alex was already talking about it. Rich Walsh is working on that. You've seen the demonstration from Alex yesterday. Some of the upcoming features are an option to also set the resolution of the large icons and the X-Center icons in one place so that it matches. It's not intended to look like Windows. I was just talking to Matt Narauki yesterday, and I told him, you have this screen, what do you think of these icons? So I clicked to the system setup folder, I went to the workplace shell and clicked on plus, plus, plus. And at the end is the tab of the dynamic icon. So I showed it to him and he said, that's interesting, but he didn't know that it was there. So that if you are familiar with the OS2, so that's the whole idea of this new setting, that you can actually have everything in one place, so that also the icons become bigger and that the X-Center becomes bigger. Another thing that Rich is looking into is that you get in the shutdown menu of X-Workplace with UEFI a kind of a boot to menu, or boot into the firmware. That's one of the things he's next going to look into. I still haven't got around to it. If you want to sponsor Rich's work, it's all free of charge until now. It's GPL, so everybody can get it. I will add a sponsor unit to the Voice web shop, and if you're interested in sponsoring his development, you're free to do so. This is a quick PM mockup tool. The code in it is working, but this is intended to allow you to change the size of the folder icons and the X-Center, and based on the font, I understand that you then select, it will recommend this. So this is just a recommendation, you're free to change it, and then when you change for example, the dynamic icon, you can then, it will automatically set dynamic icons. So with the press of a button on a large screen, you will get everything then that we can set to the proper resolution. Here you can see a bit of an example on a resolution with 3840 times 2160. On the left side you can see how big the icon is without the PNG icon, and on the right side you can see how big the folder is. And it recommends you that you turn the accent or large icons on. So then you have the resolution stuff in a single place. I'm not going to do the demo, I was planning that, but Alex already did it, so I'm not going to take more of your time off. Status of Bitwise works. Well, you probably already heard me talking a bit about it. There is Greg Young actually already had to step in and save all of the work done. There is an outdated version of Drupal currently in NetApps RPM. You can just go to ANPM, click on Drupal, click on install, and it will download everything and pop up an icon on the desktop. I strongly recommend that you set the virtual address limit to 2048. That makes the browser run a whole lot more stable. Yes, it crashes, but that's what it is.
Where do you do that?
Config sys.
Config sys.
Oh, it's config sys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the values are somewhat misleading. According to Steve yesterday, they only have a granularity of 512.
This is 4 times
Really?
512.
This is yesterday's.
This is 4 times 512. This, if that's what you
Right.
Yeah, but 1576 is our default
Right.
for some
It's
reason.
1536.
1536?
Yeah. 512 lower than that, right? 512 higher than that would be the next step, and the next step would be the last step, 30, 70.
Oh, so anything in between, does it round up or does it round down?
Stephen didn't actually say.
Yeah.
I think it's.
Here's a quick rundown. The gist of it is that the question keeps coming, why is the browser not moving forward? The gist of it, Dmitry left Russia. He couldn't stand the genocidal war of Putin. He's been a political dissident. He started a news website inside of Russia called Zona Media in 2014. He was one of the technical founders of that organization, and when the presentation is available, you can click on that link, and that's an interview with him in a Norwegian newspaper where he tells why he left his country. The problem for him right now is that he's currently countryless. He has a Russian passport, but he first moved to Turkey for a couple of months as a stopgap measure. He then moved to one of the Baltic states, but he only has a visa to stay there that is extended from half a year to half a year. And I talked to him in Istanbul a whole week. I visited him there last year. You know, then you really get to see what it's like to say arrivederci in a week's time. So he's still grappling with where am I going to live, you know? So when his visa runs out, if it's not extended in one of the Baltic states, where do you go next? He can't go back to Russia because he'll probably be either recruited for military service, or they'll throw him in possibly in jail or prosecute him for his statements. I can only say this is how he feels about it. No? He's holding a sign that says Russia equals fascism. I think that's for a Russian, it's pretty clear that's how you feel about your country. And that's why he's gutted mentally also. You know, he sold his house, he sold his car, everything. He threw everything away, and I was just looking for a new place. So, and it's not easy for Russians that are anti-Putin, that left their country, to get a visum somewhere, especially the European Union. It is very, very difficult for a Russian to get a visum. Taking that to the browser, you know, you need to have the mental energy to work on it. Now, moving forward, he's currently on tour in the Baltic states, in the US, with the Russian rock band Pussy Riot, which is anti-Putin as well. and he's back on the 14th of December. That's where we get back in sync on this browser topic. I have been talking to him about a roadmap. I've always written these updates on articles os2voice.org, and I left the 2 out there, sorry. And those, I want to clarify, are always written in conjunction with Dimitri, and he approves that. So what's written there is also done by him. The technical statements made by them are verified by Steve. He gives also his input, and Dimitri also runs through it. So it's not something that I shake out of my sleeve. He's always, that you didn't know that probably, he's always been doing work for the Russian website Media Zona, and he's currently still doing that. So that shouldn't impact his future plans. But he's always kept it a secret because it's simply controversial. Zona Media is now declared as a foreign agent in Russia, meaning that you're not allowed to work anymore. You're under sanctions, basically. So that's why he kept it quiet all of these years. What is next? One of the things that wasn't clear for us and Dimitri, and this shows you the sheer size of the project, there were updates coming out for Qt5. And one of the reasons that Bitwise Works stuck to Qt5 is because it wasn't 100% clear what was in the updates. It was only when Dimitri recently looked again, turns out they only get security updates, but not new code for the Chromium engine. So we will switch to Qt6, it's inevitable. One of the things, and I'll get back to the GCC factory project in a minute, one of the things that we as a community need to look at is that it is absolutely true that the Double browser that we now have is not suitable for all of our daily needs. It doesn't have password saving, for example. The Double browser at the time was just used as a stopgap measure, literally, to get something out finally. So what we're now seeing is that everybody's compiling Double. But what we as a community need to look at is what would be the best way forward? Well, I had a discussion with Andy, I think yesterday, or Greg, and it turns out that the Otter browser that we were previously targeting, which has a bit more features, it's that its development seems to have winded down on the other side. So this is one of the things that I'm trying to coordinate. Just so the question is, with all of the developers that we have, what is a better step? Go to Double, add the missing features, or is there maybe another Qt available browser that works with Qt6, and that we can say, oh, that might be usable. That are some of the discussions that we need to have, yes.
What Chromium, is that an option?
Sorry? No,
Chromium.
no, that part is closed source as far as I know. That's not available.
Oh,
What
I
is
thought
it?
was.
Chromium is closed source.
The UI, I think, is closed source, isn't it?
Chrome we don't. Not Chrome, Chromium. There's a open,
Using Rust, really?
there's a version of Chrome which is Chromium.
Qt WebKit is Chromium. That is Chromium. It's the engine. The engine
See,
is open.
Okay.
At the time I went through this whole ordeal with Steve and with Dimitri, and this was all, it's like reading tea leaves. What's the best approach to take? We've got one FTE to work on this. You've seen how much work Paul has been putting into this. So it's very difficult to overlook. What are you going to do? Could have we gone with Pale Moon? The estimate of me, Steve, and Dimitri was that at a certain moment, Pale Moon will hit the ground because it's based on the Firefox engine. And the expectation is that Rust code will start to sip through in the future. Now, can we get a Rust compiler on OS2? Possibly, but even if we get a Rust compiler, we also need to port the Rust libraries to OS2. Who's going to do that? We're already grappling with the current maintenance. So that's why in the end we went with Qt. Now with the browser, I've always said that the browser itself, despite the fact that Firefox has all sorts of features, a lot of people I now know have stepped to Double forced because Firefox has become to a rate that it doesn't work anymore. You told me that yourself, and you're now running with Otter and Double mostly because it's not delivering what your expectations are, basically.
More or less, yeah.
Anyway, so there's still something that, and I get this from Dimitri, so I'm not a tech guy. One of the reasons that in the multi-process mode the browser still seems to crash is this. The libc code that he has ported is based on the Linux code, and on Linux has progressed for 25 years. So the libc code for its multi-process modes expects certain things that the Linux kernel offers, but OS2 doesn't. For this, code was implemented in libc. Maybe he could have written that for OS2, but if you look at the size of the WebKit engine and the amount of available resources we have, human resources, it's easier to try and adopt the code to run on OS2 than rewrite it, if it was small. Another thing that Paul said is Node.js will probably need to be updated if we want to move beyond the current versions of Qt, which is a pretty monstrosity in itself. And indeed, there are some things that you bump into because it's 64-bit code. Better put, some of these projects tend to use up a lot of address space, and they sometimes don't even check if there's still sufficient memory. I think did Steve not have an issue with PHP where he found out that it was just continuing to consume memory without checking it?
No, that wasn't PHP. That was Clam AV.
Okay, but you see the same issue with what Paul Smedley told himself on Linux. It's pretty easy for a Chromium-based browser, WebKit browser on a Linux box with 16 gigs of RAM to also consume just about all the memory. I work at a help desk with Windows, and people with an 8 gigabyte laptop with Windows 10 are complaining that it's slow. But yeah, Edge, which is also a Chromium browser, easily chews up 1.5 to 2 gigs of RAM. You need to shut it down and restart it to recover the memory. So that's what is currently basically on the agenda. Moving to Qt6, resolving these crucial libc crashes, which can seem to cause intermittent crashes. But this is pretty complex code that offers shared memory support, and it enables you that when you take the browser tab and drag it out, that it becomes a separate spawned process, and that's what needs to be fixed. As a note, somebody actually asked me, at the current time that Dimitri is not working, he's also not getting paid. People, I think that was kind of maybe not clear, but things have been pretty low in terms of output. The other thing that still is interesting, because we have the WebKit engine, it also has support for webcams. What is missing there is that BitwiseWorks already has DLLs to support webcams from application level. The only thing that support needs to be built into the WebKit/Qt multimedia library. And then you can start using services such as Jitsi, for example, on OS2. But first things first, that's the browser. I'm going to take a little sidestep here because I've now done this for 20 years. I've worked with Steve, helping a lot of people on OS2. And I think that if you look at the things that I bump into, and I think Greg will actually underline this, what I'm saying. I'm not a developer. I've written some C++ code when I was in my IT course, but I'm not going to let you use my code because you'll be running out the door instantly. It's horrible code. Here are some of the conclusions that I put. The first thing is, even if you pay people, they also need to have a willingness to work on OS2, because OS2 certainly comes with a learning curve. And that's really an issue. I mean, you can pay somebody an amount of money, but if they're not willing to learn it, I mean, if you have a Linux box, everything comes right out of the box, literally. You type in RPM, the build config environment, everything's there. On OS2, that's not the case. It's pretty good, but that's why sometimes Paul Smedley distributes its whole zip file to people that are interested in compiling it. OS2, whether we like it or not, is an old platform, and there are limitations in that. There is also sometimes debugging issues with device drivers because you need to use a kernel debugger. Greg, what did you tell me yesterday about learning to use the kernel debugger yourself?
not sure I'm very good at it, but just getting the serial port set up was a very painful undertaking.
And after that, working with the debugger.
Yeah, working with the debugger, it's in some senses like any debugger. You're setting breakpoints and you're just essentially looking through the memory, which is all basically an assembly. And
It doesn't know source code.
to some extent, but
You-
you
you-
have
you-
to remember most of this is IBM's
Oh.
code.
You
I've defined my own.
now you can load a sim file so that you can see the function names.
Right, you can see some things.
But you mostly see assembly output.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what. And how difficult was that for you to learn to read?
it's like I have to look up a lot what they are.
Yeah.
What's in them. And Steve helped me a huge amount in doing it. I probably would have never succeeded in fixing the FAT32 problems that I used this to fix without his help.
There you see. So there is one thing I liked what David did years ago already. You have that created that 32-bit library with a presentation, and as far as I can tell, did anybody ever contact you with a question about it?
Not that I know of.
So we have tools out there. I think your library makes it a whole lot simpler. Takes a lot of the heavy lifting away.
Really simple.
So this is where you see that we have some tools available. We've advertised them. Nobody picks up. So again, no condemnation, but here you see that there is simply a learning curve involved with it. It's not like, yes.
Can you explain Dave's 32-bit driver?
Oh, well, let him. I'm not going to explain it. He wrote it, so.
It's the driver development kit. There's two kits. There's a 16-bit kit and a 32-bit kit, depending on what kind of driver you want to build. And it handles all of the operating system interface. And so that all you have to do is write a C file that contains what's unique for whatever device you want to control, or whatever operation you want to do.
And where is that?
It's on my website.
You have a website?
Yeah, if you go to the Arcanoa website, go to the wikis, and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see there's a wiki page for developers.
Okay.
And on that page, it talks about the different compilers, and there's a link to toolkits for device drivers.
Okay, thank you.
And do you not require the IBM?
You have to have an IBM DDK to build device drivers.
Thank you, David.
Sure.
So, my boyfriend over the last couple of years, when I met him, he said, OS2? You know, it's the usual response, but I persevered. So the last couple of years, he started going like, well, you know, he was bored, was looking for something else to do. So he started looking at some of these things that he was interested in, and going like, well, we had an old version of CD Record, was it version 2? So he made the version 3 and applied some patches to it so that it worked better. You could, for example, not mount an ISO, a CD drive, and write files to it. The files would get garbled. He did some Apache debugging for Mensis. It actually uses NetData, which is a very kind of PHP kind of predecessor for OS2.
DB2, it's a DB2 add-on.
Yes, and it's a kind of a predecessor for PHP. You can do scripting and talk to the database. And that wasn't working, so we fixed that. I'll show you the secure boot tools in a minute, and the VMware tools already showed you yesterday. So he's interested in OS2, but he does most of his stuff still on Linux. He'll never migrate. I can't persuade him, so I've given up. But he's there to help. So here are some of the things that talking to him. This is just a couple of simple things that he observed. And this is not a condemnation of everybody, but this is what you see, that somebody who's not into OS2, who can write C++ code, went to university, worked at a company that made medical imaging softwares, you know, he's got the skill set. But when he came to OS2, there are simply a couple of things that you then notice, and that's that the information environment is not as complete on Linux with everything attached to it. That's also what Bitwise Works encounters when working on stuff like, oh, we don't have this library, we don't have this specific makefile. It's not a complete package on Linux. You can just download a couple of RPMs and most of the stuff gets installed out of the box. He did use the EDM2 website, but I think there was one thing, there was a small little bug in it, so I don't know if he'll report that, I'll ask him. So again, you know, it's always this extra mile that you need to take. Best example was with the ESXi tools is that he's not aware of how OS2 works. So at one day, I was testing the latest build on ESXi, hit the copy button, and the whole WPS froze instantly. I said, it worked a week ago, what did you do? And he said, I cleaned up some code. I said, well, what did you clean up? I don't know. And I go like, well, you did change something. I recommended him. If you're developing, general rule of thumb, where possible, make certain that you have a revision control system. If something breaks, then you can step back to older versions and maybe trace. If you can't find it with debugging, then you can maybe step back through the versions. So I told him, well, go back through the versions, see which one worked. Took him 2.5 days to figure it out. Now, I might be using the wrong terminology, but as it turns out, if you make a clipboard application, you need to tell the PM shell that you create a queue for the clipboard, and yet accidentally remove that one line of code as soon as, what is that doing there? Is that a condemnation of everybody? No, but that was a learning curve. You said, okay, this is what is required to get it done. And this is what you see with all of these types of development things, is that there are little tweaks on the platform that you need to know about. And as I said, you know, our GCC toolkit, GCC toolchain is far from complete. So it is there, we get a lot done, but there's always this last 5% that you need to do to get it to work. And that's where the learning curve is always in. What I've seen actually over the last 20 years is, together with Steve, especially in my Menzies days, we try to get people on OS2 and help us with development. But a lot of the volunteers that tried simply got stuck. Not because of their unwillingness to learn, but I think it certainly takes a certain skill set, perseverance, and very much accuracy. We worked with a company to write a device driver for a Realtek card, and we had put in the contract, please check in your code every week. So that if something goes wrong, you can check it. At a certain moment, they made a NIC driver for the Realtek driver. It was, by the way, never released, because it would crash. It took 2 project managers and 2 developers and 4 months of work trying to figure out why it crashed. They canceled the contract, we didn't pay them, and I sent a memory dump off to Steve. Took him 15 minutes to find out it was broken. And these guys were using print fset all the time. So you see again the problem. This is why it's not a coincidence that you always see the same familiar names like Dimitri, Paul Smedley, David, Steve. You see the same, the usual suspects. So this is where I'm gonna make a turn for it. A new project, a new idea. I was already talking about it during Paul's presentation. We have a couple of people. We have people contributing in their own way with their own skill set, and that is great. Everybody that contributes is extremely welcome. We have a shortage of human resources, that's no secret. So question is, how can we bring that together for the end user and for the developers? I frequently have Paul said over the years, I publish my stuff, but I rarely get any feedback. So here are a couple of ideas. What the GCC factory is a developer mailing list, and the idea is to make the final step. I mean, look at Albert Paul. If you look at the OS2 world, or he publishes at almost conveyor belt speed Qt applications. It's a zip file that gets shipped off to hops, and in my opinion, it kind of becomes a black hole. Now, if you know what you're looking for, and does it get feedback? It's just a zip file. So the idea is, why can't we start building RPM files? And I know Greg loves RPM files. The spec files are horrible, but the idea is this. What if you could simply start taking start building RPM files with the applications that we already have? Put a standard README file in it, put an icon on the desktop, maybe in the programs folder. If you have a game, put it in the games folder, put something in the utility folder so that it sorts a bit logical. And what do you then start to get? Then you actually get something that is installed, puts an icon on the desktop. The README file says where you can report a bug. And then hopefully more people will be inclined to return feedback to the developer. That also is very encouraging for developers. I've had so many developers on OS2 that get somewhat less enthusiastic because, just like Paul said, I rarely get any feedback. So, and then the customers say, well, the software is buggy or it's not tested. That's the next step. And this I will absolutely admit, I've done software testing in my life, and this here, that test server, is absolutely extremely simple. Will it capture all the bugs? Absolutely not. But we've seen a couple of very fundamental things happen in the past. That the library was updated. For example, it broke OpenOffice. Why? Just starting it. I think in the past we had, did we not have something, David, with PMMill years ago that something in libc broke it and it didn't work anymore? I seem to recall that occurred.
That happens a lot.
Yeah. So the question is, what can we do to automate that? There's already a VM running in a data center with ArcaOS, and the idea is simple. We run a rec script, it downloads all the updates from NetLab's experimental, and then we simply start running programs. Now it's very well possible that if a program crashes, that you check the path if there's an except queue report or a pop-up log entry, and that you can then test that program. There's also a program from IBM, employee written software, called APMT, which emulates mice and keystrokes. So you could do some basic testing with it. Is this going to capture all the bugs? Absolutely not. But it's intended as a very rudimentary testing that a program can start up and doesn't crash. So that if we push out new libc updates or other DLLs, that it has had a basic test. And if it breaks in experimental, the intention is that it simply starts running on a cycle of every 24 hours. So if something new gets put into NetLab's experimental, that it automatically starts to test it. And if something breaks, that the script then per application sends an email and says, hey, we're crashing. Again, absolutely not stringent software testing, but it will be a first step to do some testing. And we can do that automatically. I do, however, need people to help out and step up. I'm overcommitted. I just can't say anything else. So, that's why it comes down to this. Oh, sorry. Why should Paul Sledley and Dimitri be writing spec files? I certainly don't hope that we would ask David to start writing spec files unless he would like to, but I think all of these developers, people that have a skill set, in my opinion, unless they like it, should work on what they're good at. It would be a waste of time if Paul sits down and starts packaging Qt 6.2 if somebody else could help. I'd rather have him work on Qt and WebKit together with Steve so that it can be debugged. So that's the whole idea behind the GCC factory, to bring all of the people that we have, Dave Ko from South Korea, what's the Russian developer called again? I forget. Andre. All of those people are on the mailing list. Andy's there, Sylvan's there, Dimitri's there, to bring them all together and to see what we can do. Then we can also make strategic discussions like, okay, is the dual browser still something that we want? Is it worthwhile to start talking about updating the dual browser to fix the password code? Or does somebody know of a browser that might actually be better, which is suitable for Qt6? I found it very insightful. I think that Greg or Andy told me that, Alter development is at a standstill. It's still at Qt5 somewhere. Okay, that was still in my brain. Like, maybe we can use the Otter browser because it's slightly more mature. But it's not suitable for Qt. Those types of discussions and feedback are crucial so that we can tell you guys, we've got an overall plan. It's a plan. But at least we can tell you that we are looking more structured way how we can do this. Some of the other things I'd like to include in the repository are really frequently used programs, such as, for example, BlueCat which is now sitting on hops somewhere. I find it beneficial in ANPM that it has a searchable index. I can press a button, right click on install. Co recently released 2 new builds of VLC Media Player that are out on a zip file on hops. So wouldn't it be great if you just click a button, installs the VLC Media Player, a README link like here you can get the code, here you can report the bug, and if it's updated you just click update all and you update it, just like on Linux. How does anybody feel about this GCC factory idea? It's just another idea that I came up with to try and grease the wheels a bit. Yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna talk about putting packages in, RPM in, and I may be very inexperienced, I am very inexperienced in using RPM, but my experience is they all install in a predetermined location.
That's true.
And
That's, yeah.
And if you wanna put your applications, if you wanna, segregate them in different drives and partitions, you can't do it with RPM.
That's absolutely true.
It's extremely nice to be able to go through the interface and click on it and see what's updated and what's
Yeah.
available and stuff, but the downside is you're stuck with, they're gonna put it where they wanna put it.
Yeah. Here is the short answer of that. The reason that BitwiseWorks decided to go with it RPM was because at the time, that was simply a choice that was made. Again, lack of resources. Sylvan told me many occasions that they spent about 80% of their time on support tickets, correcting people there by manually copy DLLs. And they went like, there must be a better solution.
Yeah.
Literally DLL hell. We've had people here at Warpstock where we were cleaning up 2 or 3 systems at the time 10 years ago, where we went like, oh, somebody copied some DLLs in OS2 DLL, dumped some other files in ECS DLL, add Thunderbird or Firefox to the lib path, So I understand the limitations of RPM, but as a community we've got to reconcile ourselves that we have limited resources, and that simply comes at a cost somewhere.
And maybe that is the final answer is just live with it.
We have a lot of limitations, and that's purely down to the amount of people that we have and the amount of resources that can do the heavy lifting. Yes, Dave?
I mean, I've been working through trying to understand how to use CMake beyond the sort of basic level, and it does have a function to produce RPMs out of your configuration information. So I'll find out about that.
You're welcome, talk to
See.
me. But I think what Greg already said, making an RPM file is not the difficult part probably. It's writing the spec file that does, for example, the dependency
I
checking.
think you don't need to write the spec file because it already knows enough to produce
Okay.
the RPM, I
Okay.
think.
Okay,
But I'll find out.
And
yes.
as an alternative for the course that we're going down on the browser, what if we, we being the collective we, spent a little time on VBox and then we just load some kind of operating system in a browser that runs on that operating system?
It's exchanging one problem for another. And OS2 is simply very limited in system resources. So yes, you can run a VM, but I think as somebody else already said, if you run VirtualBox, don't start any other programs because you have an increased chance that your system will get unstable. It adds another layer of overhead. You're loading a whole other operating system with everything else, and on top of that you stack up the browser, and OS2 needs to lift that weight. And does it work? Your mileage may vary, but I don't think that's an overall solution for somebody to run VirtualBox with a browser in it. You can choose it, but I don't think a lot of people would like it. And years ago we already did it at Menzies. We were running ECS with Virtual PC and with 512 megabytes of RAM assigned for Windows NT to run Microsoft Office because some colleagues needed Word. Let's just say it didn't improve the stability. A couple of the machines that were running with that were rebooted 2 or 3 times a day because of memory exhaustion. So,
Okay.
I notice you were careful to not mention that Dimitri was working on the browser anymore.
sorry?
I noticed you were careful to not mention whether Dimitri was working on the
I told you
browser
he
anymore.
hasn't been paid anymore.
Yeah.
Not that much.
Okay.
I actually,
Similarly with Bitwise Works, other than a WebKit DLL magically appeared, you haven't mentioned that they did any work. And it's sort of, this is the update on the browser and Bitwise Works, and you have mentioned no work that either one of them have done.
there have been a few updates on the browser, but there has been updates on auxiliary code. A new libc has been released, and some other libraries have been released.
I've seen that happen, but I noticed that you didn't mention it.
No,
And
but
I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't really know what's going on at the high level.
no,
This is the first address you've made on this in a year.
yes, that's true.
And so I think there's the sort of, the information's not moving as freely as it
no.
needs to. And you say, well, you can't find the developers. And I know that there's thousands of OS2 developers who are qualified to do this work, who are just retired IBM guys and other retired OS2 people, who just don't know that there's anything going on.
Yeah, I know.
So
Well,
I think that there's a problem that's not particularly technical here. This is more of a society.
I've told it to other people,
Yeah.
give me a call tomorrow and give me a name, I'll talk to them.
Right. Well, that's not going to happen. That's going to make it worse.
It's
What do
just
you
a
mean?
one-on-one solution.
Yeah.
You need to do the outreach to get this thing going.
I think
Get
there
the
needs to
people
be
into
something
Harvard
more
for this.
public going on.
Yes, well, I think
That's
that was
the
your
major-
general point as well about visibility of OS2.
Yeah.
It's mostly preaching to your own church, basically. And what I said, I had it in my Menzies days, we're just like an overloaded freight train going up a steep incline, the wheels are slipping. Every human resource is busy to keep the OS running. And if other people are willing to contribute to marketing or reaching out, certainly welcome, but nobody's picking up the initiative. Should I do it? Should you do it?
It's not entirely true. I mean, Arcanoa released a new operating system and got quite a bit of press on it in August.
Yeah, well, ask him, he didn't know about it.
Yeah.
And go to a computer conference. I've been to one in October, and I said, and I held a presentation. There were 2,000 people, 10 are interested in OS2, and one person at the end came to me and said, I might be interested to buy it. But he said that he didn't know that it existed.
Yeah.
How do I reach them? We've discussed that before,
Mhm.
and I don't know how to reach them.
Right.
So-
some
Would
effort's
Google
better
that?
than none.
Google that.
What?
With Google that. But
Well,
We tried it at XU. I think we
Yeah.
spent for a couple of months about 500 to 600 euros on it, and it yielded zero result. Nothing measurable. So, to get some publicity, I will do a Warpstock 2024. It's either going to be in Frankfurt or in the Netherlands. I'm trying to keep it in sync with Lewis, see if he can make it and that it fits in his agenda. So I'm going to see if it's going to be at the end of May, beginning of June, summer next year.
excellent.
So then you can hopefully have the benefit of doing it in Western Europe is that the German rural area where a lot of people live, the industrial heartland of Germany, there are a lot of OS2 users there compared to other parts of Europe. So we could actually get a Warpstock with about 30, maybe 35 people if we're lucky. So I'm always open to suggestions. I'll be honest, I've done this work for now 25 years. Maybe I'm also admitting I've rusted in a couple of patterns. I have a part-time job for 4 days a week. I work sometimes until 2 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 7 in the morning and go to the office. So, sometimes you have an automated trend. I'm more than happy to talk to you guys, to anybody who has suggestions about OS2, how to reach out to the community. I've tried to contribute for the last 25 years with every passion that I can think for it to get it done. I'm also a human being. I'm not faultless. In fact, not. I've had a couple of very open-hearted conversations with people, and I feel to thank them for that. But if you have any ideas or suggestions, take into account at the end of the day, somebody for some of these plans needs to step forward, and we see it everywhere. We have a lack of skills. Everybody's busy here. There are people here that are involved with Warpstock, other people develop for OS2, and other people are just an end user. Your choice is absolutely respected, but in the end, you will need somebody to sit down at the table and help out. So I'm open for the discussion. Sorry, go ahead.
And you may not know, but maybe some of you know, isn't Europe changing the requirements for getting into Europe for,
No.
are Are they requiring visas now? or-
No, not that I'm aware of.
for
You just have to
US
notify.
citizens.
Pardon?
No,
Not for US
you
citizens.
don't.
of the
You don't
vacation.
even need to fill in an ESTA form. You just go to the border. You tell that you're coming for. You get a stamp, and off you go.
Okay.
No,
That's
but there's a new requirement coming, and it's basically what the US does. Before anybody comes to the United States, it has to be reported electronically.
We do that? Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do that.
At the southern border, we do what?
So if you're coming
So
into
there are
the
leaks.
US, it's tough, but if you're going to Europe, it's okay.
Yes. No, so the Europeans are adopting the same policy. It's a security issue.
Jan, klopt dat?
And what does
Jan.
that mean in real life? I mean, do I just show
No,
up with my
I mean, maybe
passport?
the airline, when you buy a ticket or something, it's part of the price. If you buy a ticket in Europe and you're gonna come to the States, it's part of the process. There's advance
You
notification.
have to fill in an online form.
Or-
That's basically it.
Or go to the southern border of Europe and just walk right in.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
let's go.
just a quick note, quick sneak peek. Here it is. Here's now. This is what I haven't gotten around doing it. Here's a manual for the secure boot stuff to import it. So this is for laptops that do not have a setup in the UEFI setup. And with this text mode tool and this menu, you will then be able to set up. This explains how you switch it into that special mode that the tools can work. And after I finish my presentation, if anybody that has a laptop with UEFI and wants to test it, we can test this. I hope to release this after Warpstock, and we can start hammering on it. I have to say one final thing. If you do use it, save all your work. There have been some systems that may hang because it makes a call to the UEFI services. I've tested it on 2 or 3 systems. They all work, but as you always do this type of stuff, save it. This is all new stuff. This is new terrain for all of us. So that will go into a public beta cycle. This is all used at your own risk. If the house bursts down, if there's a divorce, we're not responsible. So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming from all sides of the US. And maybe see you then next year in Europe. And that's it. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions, by the way, further? Or
Just a comment. Well, I really want to go further with the RPM packages that you always wanted to put
Yes.
on OS2 Boys. So
Yes.
I will try to help
Yes.
as I can.
I can add you to the main. Look, every minute that you spend, it's a free choice, it's a free world. But if you want certain things to happen, a day is only 24 hours. So it's
Okay.
appreciated if you want help. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, it does, Ethan, that's
Okay.
okay.
Well, that wraps up. Then I'll leave the stage here quietly and
USB-C.
let somebody else
the dock
Okay.
give the
connects
final
here.
farewell. And
These
Thank
two
you.